From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wichman. The trend in Kansas wildfires continued again this year. However, unlike the numerous wildfires in 2016 and 2017, there were no catastrophic wildfires. We'll learn more from three Kansas Forest Service fire prevention specialists, Jason Hartman, Eric Ward, and Rodney Redinger. Also, K-State Farm Safety Specialist Kerry Ebert discusses the responsibility of both farmers and motorists to safely share the roadway this summer. And while the Prairie Rattlesnake in Kansas is often misunderstood and feared, K-State Wildlife Specialist Charlie Lee says it actually poses little danger if left alone. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today. The wildfire trend that Kansas has experienced over the last few years, mirroring what's happening nationally, was largely unchanged this year. The one exception being that there was no catastrophic wildfires, like in 2016 and 2017. Joining us to provide additional insight into the wildfire season in Kansas, 3 members of the Kansas Forest Service Fire Management Program: statewide fire prevention specialist Jason Hartman, fire planning specialist Eric Ward, and fire training specialist Rodney Redinger. Jason and Eric are based in Manhattan, and Rodney is based in Hutchinson. Jason, maybe first off, just some of your thoughts from this last wildfire season.
Traditionally, we kind of think of wildfire season in Kansas maybe middle of February at earliest to middle of April, and this year we were getting large fires, mini fires as early as mid-January and continued through the end of April. And with just these last couple of weeks, we've kind of started to see a break from that. So definitely very long, drawn out, compared to normal, whatever normal is.
Is that kind of how you saw it too, Eric?
Yeah, the fire situation nationwide has been changing over the last 20 or 30 years. It used to be in the western U.S., fire season was basically June through August, and a lot of areas now are saying it's at least May through September, if not beyond. So the fact that ours is getting longer would be consistent with what other parts of the country are experiencing. We've definitely seen that increase over the last several years in the amount, the number, the severity of fires.
Rodney, same situation in your area?
Yeah, we seemed to dodge a lot of bullets, but then there was still a lot of fires that we had, and our fire departments and partner agencies, they stayed very active all spring.
And I would assume a variety of reasons for these wildfires?
Yeah, there's a number of factors that have played into it historically. Like I say, this fire situation nationwide has been changing over the last several decades, specifically the last 2 or 3 years in Kansas. We've had the same kind of situation happen where we had a really, really good growing season, lots of rain during the late spring through midsummer primary growing season, and then the rain just ended, and nothing all fall, all winter, going into fairly serious drought during that time frame. So a huge amount of fuel to burn and absolutely no moisture going into the spring. That's what set us up in 2016 for the Anderson Creek fire, 2017 for the Highlands and Starbuck fires, and a bunch of others that were at the same time also very severe, but nobody even remembers their names because they were dwarfed by those two. This year we had a very similar situation going into the spring, and we had a very busy spring, but what we didn't have was 1 or 2 major catastrophic fires. We really only had one that did significant extensive property damage and got very large. The Badger Hole fire that burned in from Colorado and burned into southwest Kansas. And I think there's a variety of reasons why we were busy but never had that single catastrophic big fire this year. I think one of the things that changed this year, and some of it you got to just say was good luck, some of it was well-placed wheat fields that stopped stuff before it ever got big, but some of it I think is every level from the smallest fire department to every level of state government was better prepared this year and was more proactive. fire departments were hitting fires hard and fast. In years past, it was not uncommon for a fire department to get sent to a fire and say, well, we'll go check it out and see what we got, and if we need help, we'll call. This year, as soon as they were notified, they were calling help. So a lot more resources on the fire a lot quicker, and I think that played a large part in helping keep a lot of these from ever getting big to start with.
One of the things, that we try to really emphasize to the counties is firefighter and public safety. I mean, just trying to keep that at the forefront of everybody's mind when we're doing this. But if the fire departments can be as prepared as they can be, given their current budget situations and how much equipment they have or the number of people that they have, try to help them maybe re-emphasize what they already know in terms of just kind of bring it back to the forefront of their mind before fire season starts. The other thing that I think really plays into it a lot is being able to recognize when it's beyond what we can handle locally and asking for help earlier. Nobody wants to be the one that got beat, quote unquote. I know you can't see my air quotes on the radio, but quote unquote got beat. But it's okay, we're all here, and that's what the wonderful thing about the people of Kansas is that everybody helps each other out in times of need, and that's okay, and that's what we're all here for, to help each other out, and recognizing those factors early so that we can call for help earlier to maybe keep the fires smaller.
Well, it sounds like that's one of the big keys is not only your response time, but the notification that I think this is getting out of control. Yeah,
hands down, we'd all agree that, Kansas fire departments and firefighters are very, very good, and as good as any fire personnel in the nation at the types of fires we've all been used to for years and years. The fires that are everybody's back home, it's fires out, and you're back home in 2, 4, maybe 6 hours. And making that transition to this fire isn't going out today. It's going to go another day before we really get our handle on this. We're going to have to monitor it for maybe multiple days. Has been a fairly steep kind of learning curve, but everybody's really jumped on board and been very willing, and it's come a long ways in a short time that those notifications are getting made, that recognizing this is going to be a long-term thing. We're going to have to get long-term help, and also everybody being willing to join in to the process of how to move help from one side of the state to another in those times has rapidly developed with just a very cooperative mindset across the fire service in Kansas.
And volunteer firefighters, that's probably the biggest force we have across Kansas?
By far. Estimates are that there's somewhere roughly around 16,000 firefighters in Kansas, and approximately 13,000 of those are volunteer. So most of the land area in the state is protected by volunteer firefighters. Population-wise, the career guys kind of get the edge because of the big cities, but most of the land is protected by volunteer fire departments. They have been, and always will be the backbone of the fire service in Kansas, and especially in the areas that have the wildfires. It's not downtown Wichita and Kansas City typically. They can, but it's typically the small rural areas where these fires are occurring. And those are almost exclusively protected by volunteers.
And those are the ones that you spend the most time working with, are the volunteers?
We've actually in recent years had a lot more interest from the career departments. Jason and I both did several classes in Topeka. Rodney's been doing classes in Wichita with departments that in years past maybe hadn't felt a great deal of concern about wildfire issues. But a lot of what we deal with is the volunteers. And even at that, I think the attitude has changed towards training. As Jason mentioned, fire departments in Kansas have long been highly skilled at putting out grass fires. And there was a time, it was a little bit of a challenge to convince folks that more training was really that important because, hey, we do it 20 times every spring. And after the last several years, people have really recognized that maybe there is more to it than what we've always done, and there is another level that we need to move towards. And as Rodney mentioned earlier, the training requests this spring were astronomically higher than they've been in years past, from the smallest to the biggest departments in the state.
Are you learning different ways to control or to slow down the fires?
To me, that's a large-scale conversation to have. Lots of years of, in certain areas where maybe prescribed fire hasn't been as prevalent as in other parts of the state, and there are different kinds of fuel builds up, cedar trees, blackberry bushes, plum thickets, and those kinds of things, particularly in central Kansas where I'm from. That's been one of the things that contributes to some large fire growth, and just even back to back years of good growing seasons. And if it doesn't get cleaned up, whether that's through fire or some other means. That's going to be a lot of fuel out there for the fires to continue to spread. One of the things I think we seem to have improved on over the last couple of years is coordination. So just thinking back to the fire that came in from Colorado, we were able to communicate with the state of Colorado pretty effectively off the bat. Several fires that started down in Oklahoma this year, we were on the phone and communicating with them about what they had, potentials. So the coordination, I think, of not only in-state resources, but also some of the out-of-state stuff that were kind of on the periphery of Kansas. I think that was improved this year. It might have helped to keep some of the fires smaller, but at the end of the day, each individual fire, it's going to be the boots on the ground, the people doing the work that's going to determine the outcome of that fire. So, I
think as you mentioned at the beginning, fuel and the weather conditions play the biggest factor. So what are we hoping for going forward then?
Well, it's too early to know for sure what the weather's going to be over the next 12 months, or more like probably 8 or 9 months at this point, to impact next spring. The most recent we heard is that this may be a drier summer, which will not necessarily be good for most of your listeners. Could be really good for us sitting in this room here. From the standpoint, if we do get less fuel buildup than we've had the last several years, it could be a less frightening situation going into next spring. Time will tell how that plays out. We don't feel like this is a fluke, that this is a couple years of bad fires and then it's going to go away and we're not going to see it again. Again, this is consistent with the trend that's been happening throughout the Great Plains over the last 30 plus years. It's been moving north out of Texas for decades, and we've seen it coming, and it's here now. So this probably is kind of becoming a new normal for Kansas, and it's something we need to be prepared for. Again, what the next year in particular plays out, we'll just have to see as the weather gets more detailed this summer, and we can actually see what happens.
Nice to know that you guys are on top of this, and I appreciate the update. Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks for having us.
From the Kansas Forest Service Fire Management Program, statewide fire prevention specialist Jason Hartman, fire planning specialist Eric Ward, and fire training specialist Rodney Redinger, with a look at the 2018 wildfire season in Kansas. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Summer is a busy time for Kansas farmers, and much of that work involves moving heavy machinery from field to field. That often means that farmers and motorists are sharing the same roadway for miles at a time. K-State Farm Safety Specialist Kerry Ebert says it's up to both farmers and motorists to safely share the roads. Kerry, with wheat turning in parts of the state, that's a pretty good sign that harvest is not too far off, and with that come a number of safety concerns and things that we want to highlight today.
It sure does bring in our, kind of farm safety season that starts with planting, and then when we get to harvest, wheat harvest is when things really start to get busy on the farm, where we've still got some planting going on, we've got some tillage operations going on, we've got hay coming on that needs to be harvested, and then wheat harvest. And it all just culminates, I think, kind of with wheat harvest. That's when the frenzy gets to go. And so we want to make sure that people, are thinking about how busy they're going to be. We all we know that in the back of our minds, but just to stop and take stock of, the task list that needs to be accomplished each day, and make sure that, we're taking time for ourselves, first of all, to eliminate or reduce those types of farm accidents that can be caused by fatigue.
That is really one of the big things, isn't it? Fatigue and inattentiveness?
Yes, it really is. And especially this time of the year, because there is, as I said, there's so much happening all at the same time. And we get into kind of one of those spring, early summer storm patterns, and so we try to work all of those tasks around the weather and the conditions in the fields and, maintenance issues. Hopefully maintenance won't be an issue, that we got all that taken care of in the spring or over the winter and everything's in tip-top shape. But the occasional breakdown still happens, so that adds stress. The push to get something planted before rain or something harvested before rain also becomes a stressful time. And so fatigue can manifest itself in a lot of ways. And I think over the years, we see more and more and more studies about the effects of that stress and fatigue on our bodies. And where farming, everything we do seems to be so physical that to keep, our bodies in tip-top shape, we really need to try to keep the stress levels as low as we can. And one of the ways you can do that is to get plenty of sleep at night. Now, that's real easy for me to sit here and say that in a studio talking through the radio, but it really is. If there's a few minutes during the day that you can take a nap to kind of rejuvenate yourself, that's great. And there's no harm, no shame in that, especially if the nights get to be pretty short as far as, working well into the night as it stays lighter, longer as we move towards summer. That longer day tends to make us overdue.
And really trying to take some breaks throughout the day?
Breaks throughout the day, plenty of rest when you can get it. So like I say, a full 8 hours is great if you can get it, but that's a luxury. Plenty of hydration. This heat wave that we've had that came on so intensely has really highlighted that need to stay hydrated. It's typically not this warm, this early in the season, but hydration can contribute to that fatigue. Proper nutrition also. Meals on the run can be a challenge, but if we pack those meals full of good nutrition, that keeps us going too. Maybe, plenty of carbs to keep the energy level going, plenty of fluids, but then, the proteins, the fruits and the vegetables, everything that keeps our whole, body system going. And if we can keep ourselves going, it's easier to keep the machinery running like it should be running because, of course, that's the matter at hand is to get a wheat harvest in and hauled to the elevator or to the storage wherever it needs to go after it's done, which kind of leads us into some of those traffic safety issues where I like to talk not only to the farmers out there but also to everybody else who isn't farming and sharing the road with the farmers. This is everyone has seen, more and more equipment. It kind of starts maybe in March or April, and we see more and more equipment being moved on the roads, and that's necessary. It's necessary for farmers to get their jobs done, and, most people work really hard to try to time that movement of equipment so that it's during a lower traffic time, especially if you are unfortunate enough to have to move your equipment on a heavily traveled rural roadway. Also, the rest of us, if we could just stop for a minute ourselves and take a step back and look at this picture clearly, that these folks are, moving heavy equipment, slow-moving equipment, respect it, first of all, respect the size and the power of that equipment, and also the fact that there's a job that needs to be done. But we also need to pay really close attention to, where that equipment might be moving. Sometimes drivers can be fooled by the flashing red lights. And it's difficult to, if you're not paying really close attention, to tell when those the four-way flashers turn into maybe a left turn signal. So only the left side is flashing, and that means that equipment's going to probably make a wide turn to the left if you're trying to pass. We see an awful lot of passenger vehicle, farm vehicle accidents with left turns off of especially paved roadways. That seems to be where people are in such a big hurry. But honestly, if you slow down and just follow them, think of all the beautiful nature you can see on the roadside. And one way to think of following, a slow-moving vehicle when you're upset or you're, in a big hurry is that it's not a whole lot different. The length of time, the farmer doesn't want to be out there on that road any longer than you want them out there either. They want to be in the field or safely tucked into the shed at home, wherever they're going. But it's not a lot different than sitting through a stoplight or two or three in town. And, we may not be real patient about that either, but we all certainly understand the bad consequences of running a red light, for example. So, again, if roadways are wide enough, and it's safe to pass, then certainly you can, vehicles can pass slow-moving farm vehicles. But if it's not safe to pass, if it's hilly, if there are lots of curves, there's no reason to put people's lives in danger, because every year we have an awful lot of roadway accidents, and it happens a lot during harvest time when there's just a tremendous amount of activity on the farm.
And by and large, they're really typically not traveling that far.
Exactly. That's, most, if you see a farm vehicle, they're not going to be driving on that road for 20, 30 miles, most likely. Most folks, farmland that's fairly close to where they originated. And again, if you're a local and you kind of know the neighborhood, you know who's driving the tractor, you got a pretty good idea of which field they're going to turn into. But if you're not familiar and, you don't recognize the tractor or the piece of equipment as belonging to, your neighbor, Farmer Brown, it's not going to take that much time to just wait till it's safe. And most likely, by the time patience totally wear out, then that slow-moving vehicle is going to be off the road and off doing what it needs to do, because, again, these vehicles are not designed to drive on roadways. So they're, inherently a little bit unstable on a smooth surface. And so, again, that's why we really need to be careful, on the roadways, both both motorists and then the operators of the farm equipment. Of course, then we can get into, young people driving, inexperience with the tractor. And again, we need a lot of patience and a lot of training, a lot of safety training, but just common sense training.
And once they get in the field, that can also be dangerous too, especially if it's a rough field.
Yes, it can. And especially, with wheat harvest coming up, and just recently we've had some pretty heavy rains, and so I suspect there might be some gullies formed, maybe underneath that thick stand of wheat in places. So yeah, we're going to have to be real careful driving through the fields as we start harvest, or taking vehicles out to haul grain to the elevator or move it out of the field. Combines are pretty heavy and relatively, they look odd, but they're pretty stable machines. A bigger issue, especially with gullies that have washed that we're not aware of. I mean, most people know their fields well enough to know where there's a gully, but if something has washed and just in a recent rainfall and formed, we need to be a lot more careful when we're using tractors out there, because their stability, sometimes is a lot less than a combine. But, either way, any type of farm equipment can inherently be unstable if it's way out of balance. Heavy loads will shift the center of gravity and make them more unstable. So we just have to really be aware of what we're doing, how much time we have to do it, allow plenty of time to get the jobs done if we've got that luxury. And if not, then just use extra caution if you're trying to speed up a task that might need to really take a little longer than what we've got time to do.
I think you probably said it best when you pointed out the fact that this is really something that everyone needs to be aware of for the remainder of this summer. Is there's going to be farm traffic, there's going to be machinery on the roads, so slow down a little bit and be patient and be safe.
Yes, that's what we would like. We want everybody to make it through harvest and through the summer season and have an enjoyable summer, and to do so safely.
That's K-State Farm Safety Specialist Kerry Ebert reminding motorists to be patient while driving this summer. She says the few extra minutes that it takes to safely get around a slow-moving piece of farm equipment could save your life or someone else's. This is the K-State Radio Network.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects, so avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, taking a look at the Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report for the week ending June 3rd. There were 4.5 days suitable for field work, according to USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. Topsoil and moisture supplies rated 13% very short, 25% short, 59% adequate, and 3% surplus. Subsoil moisture supplies rated 15% very short, 33% short, 51% adequate, and 1% surplus. Winter wheat condition rated 16% very poor, 33% poor, 35% fair, 15% good, and 1% excellent. Winter wheat headed was 96%, near 99% last year and 97% for the 5-year average. Coloring was 48%, behind 59% last year, but ahead of the 43% average. Mature was 3%. Corn condition rated 1% very poor, 5% poor, 36% fair, 48% good, and 10% excellent. Corn planted was 97%, ahead of 89% last year and near the 94% average. Emerged was 90%, ahead of 74% last year and the 80% average. Soybean condition rated 1% very poor, 5% poor, 37% fair, 52% good, and 5% excellent. Soybeans planted was 79%, well ahead of 56% last year and the 50% average. Emerged was 61%, well ahead of 37% last year and the 31% average. Sorghum planted was 36%, ahead of 23% last year and the 28% average. Cotton condition rated 34% fair, 64% good, and 2% excellent. Cotton planted was 77%, ahead of 59% last year and well ahead of the 48% average. Sunflowers planted was 36%, ahead of 17% last year and the 18% average. Pasture and range conditions rated 6% very poor, 18% poor, 44% fair, 30% good, and 2% excellent. Meanwhile, USDA experts are talking with wheat growers and assessing wheat fields in preparation for issuing a new winter wheat production report next week. Gary Crawford has more.
Coming up soon, a new USDA crop production report.
Winter wheat is really the main field crop that we're looking at.
Lance Honig with USDA's Statistics Service. Back on May 10th, USDA made its first forecast for winter wheat based on surveys of farmers and fields, showing winter wheat production down 6% from the year before, coming from the lowest estimated harvested acres ever.
But a month has gone by. Conditions may be a little different than they were. Expectations could have changed. So as usual, we're back reaching out to farmers again.
Surveying the same 4,000 wheat growers plus.
We send trained enumerators into winter wheat fields across the major growing area. They'll be taking counts, measurements, and as the crop gets closer to maturity, they'll actually be harvesting portions of those fields so that we can send those to our laboratory in St. Louis for analysis there. So it's kind of a combined effort from what farmers think and then also what we can actually see for ourselves.
On about 1,100 wheat fields, the new winter wheat forecast will be out June 12th, noon Eastern Time. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Well, microbial inoculants can make silage fermentation more efficient, helping to preserve more nutrients and dry matter. In this week's Milk Lines, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook discusses several factors that dairy producers should take into consideration when choosing an inoculant.
Today I want to talk with our Kansas dairy producers concerning silage inoculants. A lot of times I get questions about silage inoculants and what makes a good silage inoculant. So here's some things you might want to consider if you're trying to choose one. First, there's two main types of silage inoculants that we can purchase. One is what we would refer to as homofermentive. In other words, they only produce lactic acid. And the other would be heterofermentive. Those would be inoculants that produce both lactic acid and acetic acid or another organic acid that is important in silage preservation. So as you start looking at different types of inoculants, one of the things you should be looking for is the type of inoculant it is and the strain numbers. There's a lot of different bacteria out there, and some of those might be lactic acid producing bacteria. The more specific ones actually have a strain number. In other words, their genetic identity is preserved. Keeping in mind that as we preserve the genetic identity and we get more specific in the real bacteria that are actually in there, it does affect the efficiency of those bacteria in the silage fermentation process. So the second thing you need to look at is target crop. Are they designed for corn silage? Are they designed for haelages? You see different crops have different characteristics as it relates to the fermentation. So if we're in corn silage, we might use one type of inoculant, but if we're putting up alfalfa silage, we may choose another one because it works better in that type of a crop. Second thing you need to be looking for is research data, published data that's about how this inoculant actually works in a silage crop, and particularly the crop that you're interested in, whether it be corn silage or whether it be haylage or another crop. One of the things that is important to look at is the biological activity of the different organisms. In other words, their viability. One of the things that you need to consider is the dosage rate that was used in the research projects. A lot of times we refer to 100,000 colony-forming units per gram of forage as a dosage, but there are other research projects that might have used 300,000 colony-forming units per gram of forage. So if you'd like to choose that one and get the same activity that was seen in the research study, you would need to dose at 300,000 colony-forming units rather than 100,000. The other thing to consider is the bacteria need to be live versus dead. So if you do something in storage to kill the bacteria, or if the bacteria just have a short shelf life, they will be dead maybe before you actually use them. So then you will not have active bacteria. So even though you might be providing 300,000 colony-forming units per gram of forage, if the bacteria are not alive, they're not going to do your silage mass very much good. A couple other things to think about is the suspension rate. How long does the bacteria actually stay in suspension after they're mixed in? In some cases, bacteria tend to settle out fairly quickly. Well, they settle toward the bottom, which means that you don't apply an even amount of bacteria across the whole volume of liquid that you're applying. So check for the suspension rate. Again, they should be able to provide that to you with their technical data. And that's kind of the final point. What kind of technical support comes with this inoculant? Better quality inoculants will have more technical support behind them. Generally, they also have more research behind them as well. So check to see what kind of technical support you're going to get if you purchase this inoculant. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging dairy farmers to consider the types of inoculant that they're purchasing.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Man, it's hot out here. Heat stress affects more than just humans. It also affects livestock. Extreme heat, humidity, wind speeds, and cloud cover all make a difference in air temperature. To control problems, make sure your livestock have shade and water provided at all times. This will help prevent problems in breeding, meat production, and reduce chances of death. Please take all these into consideration for livestock production. Brought to you by K-State Animal Science Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today, and for you now, this week's wildlife segment with Charlie Lee aboard once again, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Charlie, more about rattlesnakes this week, and they are on the move as they are well out of hibernation now, of course.
Yes, rattlesnakes, just the word alone causes some fear and anxiety in some folks. I occasionally get calls this time of year of, well, we got rattlesnakes either up around the home site or perhaps even in the home. And for people with no experience in dealing with snakes, it can be fairly traumatic. I think largely because rattlesnakes are very much misunderstood. So I thought it would be a good idea to just go over a few of the habits and characteristics and the ecology of rattlesnakes, particularly the western prairie rattlesnake.
Well, let's start with the habitat it prefers, and it's well adapted, obviously, to Kansas.
Yeah, so the prairie rattlesnake in Kansas is found in the western half of the Kansas, but they have a much broader distribution than that. They're found throughout the Midwest United States, extend up into the southwest part of Canada, and into the northwest part of Mexico. Here in the middle part of the range, they're found in environments that are considered rocky or rugged, as well as in open fields, as long as they have ample cover and that are populated with a lot of prey animals. They're found in dry grasslands. They're found in shrublands. Occasionally, we call them found in the small woodlands that we do have available in the more arid parts of the state. But the main characteristic of habitat for prairie rattlesnakes is an environment that has burrows, and those burrows can be formed from rocks or under branches or holes that are dug by other animals.
And they are quite prolific at hunting. They're really built for that, you say.
They do a good job of hunting. Their food habits are not surprising. The majority of the food habits are voles, ground squirrels, deer mice, pocket gophers. Probably one of the larger animals that they would take would be the black-tailed prairie dogs. They have a very unique way of capturing prey. They often just lay in wait until the prey animal comes by. Then they have a very rapid strike at the animal that stuns the animal. And then as part of that strike, they inject venom into the animal. And then they wait for the animal to succumb. And oftentimes it's right there on that small of an animal, of mouse size. And then they begin feeding on the animal, start to swallow it. Somewhat surprisingly, don't always give a warning before they bite or strike. The speed of that strike has been measured several different ways, and the acceleration is quite outstanding. It's a force equal to 20 Gs, and it's been measured at about 300 yards per second squared as speed. And that's really, really fast, faster than an eye blink. And it's that force that stuns the animal that is the prey for the prairie rattlesnake.
Turning that around, what preys on prairie rattlers as part of the ecological system here?
Well, there will be some birds. There will be hawks that would get rattlesnakes. Greater roadrunners are very good at killing rattlesnakes. They repeatedly peck them on the head. But humans, by and large, vehicles would be the major mortality factor for prairie rattlesnakes.
What about the reproduction? And you're getting this question, you say, once in a while. Are they more prolific than they used to be?
Well, the population of most wildlife really varies depending upon the habitat that's there and the location. I think all of wildlife population numbers have some fluctuation. They're up or down. When you have good habitat, I think rattlesnake populations respond. They are an animal that lives for a fairly lengthy time. I don't think it's unusual to have 15 to 20-year-old rattlesnakes. The maximum known lifespan in captivity was over 24 years of age. So they live a long time. The population numbers vary. They're not a very fast-growing animal. When they're born, they're probably only about 10 inches in length. The female will have average maybe slightly larger. There may be as many as 10 to 12 young snakes that are birthed, and there's really no parental guidance after those snakes emerge, and they're basically on their own from that point forward.
So once again, about encountering prairie rattlers and how to avoid any trouble. Well, if one knows a bit about their habitat and their tendencies, then they can generally steer clear of these rattlesnakes.
Yeah, most of the time it's just being aware, particularly if you're out in a country that is likely to host rattlesnakes. Be aware of the things when you're picking up or walking in areas where you don't have good view of the ground. Most rattlesnakes that have bitten humans have actually been when humans were trying to capture the snake itself. But occasionally, prairie rattlesnakes bite people. It's been a long time since we've had a fatality in Kansas from a rattlesnake bite, but occasionally fatalities occur across the United States from these unique animals. Most of the time, they've got to find other burrows around to not only for their microhabitat needs, but also to regulate their temperature. And if you've got a farmstead that perhaps was inhabited by small rodents or rodents as large as rats, then you've got the right type of conditions around there. You've got the burrow that's created, and you've got the food source, and you may have snakes up close to the living quarters. In that case, I tell people to do as good a job of lawn maintenance as possible, keep it mowed very short, and do a great job of carefully inspecting around the base of your buildings to make sure there are no cracks, crevices, or breaks in the structure that would allow the rattlesnakes to enter.
Apart from that, just appreciate that they are part of the prairie ecosystem here in Kansas, right?
I think it's important to realize that snakes are on the list of being an animal that's mainly misunderstood, and it's certainly feared by a lot of people. But I think when we understand how little danger they pose to people, and if you leave them alone, they're likely to do the same for you.
Well, there's some background on the prairie rattlesnake here in Kansas and elsewhere in the Central Plains region and its tendencies, and some thoughts on how to avoid encountering one of those. Charlie, thanks once again. Charlie Lee is a wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension.
And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. To listen to Agriculture Today anytime, visit agtoday.net, where you can listen on demand and find links to subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Stitcher Radio. This is the K-State Radio Network.